Hello, my name is Jasmine Torres, and in this presentation I will be going over the effects of fishery bycatch on marine mammals in the North Atlantic Ocean. So what is fishery bycatch and why is it so important? Well, fishery bycatch is the unintended capturing of a marine species outside of the intended target. This usually happens when marine species become entangled within the line nets of a fishery boat, and if this is left unmanaged or monitored, it could lead to extinction. If you look to the image to the left, you would see a picture of a Beijing dolphin, which was officially declared extinct in 2007 due to fishery bycatch. Now, fishery bycatch usually affects small populations with long growth periods and low reproductive rates the hardest. For this reason, marine mammals are at high risk. Now, in 1972, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was put in place, which works to prevent marine mammal species and populations from declining to the point of no return. And then, after being amended in 1994, it mandated that fisheries record the number of bycatch they encountered. However, fisheries sometimes fail to report the true magnitude of marine mammal bycatch they experience, which leads to not knowing the full extent that fishery bycatch has on the population of marine mammals. First, we will be going over commercial fisheries. So, commercial fisheries go by many names. They usually go by gillnet fisheries, longline fisheries, or trawling fisheries. Now, this is mainly because of the type of gear that they used, but they all fall under the same type of fishery, which is commercial fisheries. Now, commercial fisheries are known to cause the greatest amount of fishery bycatch, and they also cause the greatest amount of mortality rates known to marine mammals when it comes to bycatching. Now, because of this reason, commercial fisheries are highly monitored by the National Marine Fishing Service in accordance to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. However, despite this, in the U.S. alone, 12% of marine mammals have been led to exceed their potential biological removal. PBR for short, which basically stands for the number of individual species within a population that can be removed each year without preventing the population from maintaining an optimal sustainable population level. First, we will be going over longlining. Longlining is a fishery technique that is used mainly in the pelagic zone and is done using line gear that is branched with baited hooks facing vertically down into the ocean. Now, longlining fisheries usually suffer from something that is called depredation, which is basically when predators end up eating the captured target or the bait that is on these hooks, and end up getting bycatched by mistake into these nets. Now, this is a growing problem globally that seems to be increasing as time goes on. Now, unlike other types of fishery gear, longlining fishing gear is fairly easy to get out of. Most marine mammals usually just have to rip the part of the hook out, and they're usually free. However, this leads to them usually dying of entanglement later on because they end up getting some of the net that they ripped off wrapped around them. And something interesting about longlining is that because these marine mammals see these fishery vessels as a sort of food source, they end up following these vessels along their route and end up changing their own behavior when it comes to foraging. If you look at these two different pieces of data from two different studies that were done on predicting the bycatching piloted whales in accordance to longline fisheries, you could see how both temperature and season affected the bycatching of marine mammals. If you look at the graph to the left, you could see how the SST, which is the sea surface temperature, affected the occurrence of bycatching in marine mammals. If you look from December 2010 to 2014, you could see that there was a lower sea surface temperature, and because of this, it caused the lower occurrence of bycatching of marine mammals, with a median of 0.077 in comparison to a median of 0.32 when it came to December of 2015 that had a much higher sea surface temperature. And then, if you look at the graph to the right, you could see that during the months of June and August and September and October, there was the greatest amount of bycatching of piloted whales, which is usually the season with the highest temperatures, and in accordance to that, it is also the season in which squid and small pelagic fishes usually come out, which is in accordance to when fisheries usually come out so they can collect their targeted product. Next, we'll be going over trawling. And trawling is basically the technique of taking a wide open net and dragging it across the ocean floor. Trawling technique can also be used in midwater and even the pelagic zone, but it is mainly known to be used at the ocean bottom. On top of this, trawling is most often used by fisheries in Africa or in Europe than it is in the United States. Now, trawling techniques similar to longlining suffer from depredation, and this is the main reason for accidental bycatching of trawling fisheries. However, unlike longlining, marine mammals that are caught within trawling nets usually don't get out and almost die instantaneously. If you look to the image to the left, you would see an image of a longlining net. And in this image, you would see a section called the filter grid. Within this filter grid is where most marine mammals will usually die from suffocation of water pressure. And because of this, when the net is brought back to the surface, the marine mammals are usually found dead by then. Which is why trawling nets are usually considered the second most leading cause of marine mammal mortality when it comes to bycatching. However, because not many studies have been done on trawling nets, it is difficult to tell just how much of an influence trawling nets have on the bycatching of marine mammals. Finally, we'll be going over gill nets. And gill nets are the leading cause when it comes to marine mammal mortality when it comes to fishery bycatch. Now, gill nets are made of this long rectangular line net, similar to long-line fishery nets, but they have this diamond-shaped mesh attached to them. And similar to trawling nets, when a marine mammal gets stuck within this diamond-shaped mesh, they usually become entangled and suffocate to death. However, most mortalities that come from gill nets are usually from nets that have been left behind by fishery boats. On top of that, gill nets have been linked to become one of the major threats against small marine species populations such as cetaceans. And if you look to the left, you would see two different graphs. One graph on the top that shows that between the years of 1990 to 1994, the use of gill nets had increased almost twofold, while the amount of bycatching went down. However, what you should know is that in the year of 1994, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was re-amended, which led to the decrease in bycatching of marine mammals. However, this does not mean that gill nets did not account for the majority of deaths when it came to marine mammals, because if you look at the graph at the bottom, you would see that during the years of 1994 to 2006, despite the decrease in bycatching of marine mammals, it was still gill nets that led to the greatest amount of marine mammal bycatch with an 84%. Finally, we'll be going over how these two different studies show the effect of gill net bycatching has on harbor porpoises in the North Atlantic shores near the United States. So if you look to the image to the left, this was the results of a study conducted where different observers were placed on gill net fishery boats and placed in different areas where gill net fishery was occurring to see how many harbor porpoises were being bycatched in each area. And each yellow dot indicates where a harbor porpoise bycatch was witnessed. Now, as you can see, the majority of harbor porpoise bycatching occurred in areas where there were more fisheries present or where there was a higher abundance. And then you can see to the image to the right where this showed the survivorship of female harbor porpoises when it came to gill net bycatching. So as you can see, the amount of female harbor porpoises that actually managed to reach the age of 1 was about 100%. But as the years went by, when they reached about 15 years, they were about less than 20% likely to actually make it to 15. And by the time they reached 20 years, it was almost 0% chance of them actually making it there. The less likely chance that a female harbor porpoise has to actually mature and actually be able to give birth to new and more harbor porpoises, the less likely chance of the population being able to grow. This is an example of how gill net bycatching, if it isn't monitored properly, can actually lead to the decline of a marine mammal population. Next, we're going to be going over recreational fisheries. And recreational fisheries are usually done for the purpose of sports or leisure. And second-hand objective is usually the consumption of fish. Now, unlike commercial fisheries, there isn't really much known about recreational fishery bycatching effect on marine mammals, mainly because the National Marine Fisheries Service doesn't really monitor them as highly as commercial services because of a principle that recreational fisheries usually follow, which is high effort and low catchability. However, it has been recently brought to the attention of many scientists that recreational fisheries do tend to have somewhat of an effect on the decline of small marine populations, usually small cetacean populations, along with commercial fisheries. However, the true extent of how recreational fisheries affect marine mammals when it comes to bycatching is really unknown, and more studies have to be done on recreational fishery bycatching effects on marine mammals to truly have an actual idea of what's going on. Finally, we'll be going over artisanal fisheries. Now, artisanal fisheries are mostly found in underdeveloped countries or in small communities operating in small open boats. They contribute to less than 95% of the world's fisheries, and unlike other types of fisheries, these types of fisheries will actually sometimes retain and sell the bycatch marine species that they accidentally get, and then later turn these marine species into their target species. Like in Africa in the 1990s, where artisanal fisheries were selling cetaceans as their target species after bycatching so many of them. Now, under the National Marine Fisheries Service, they are required to provide the records of their bycatching of marine mammals to the state or provincial office. However, they don't usually do this, and it really isn't asked of them much, maybe because they aren't seen much of a threat to the marine mammal population. However, in recent studies, it has been shown that artisanal fisheries do provide a bit of a contribution to the decline of marine mammal populations, mainly to small marine mammal populations such as cetaceans. So the greatest effect that fishery bycatching can have on marine mammals is that it can lead them to extinction if fishery bycatching isn't regulated properly. On top of that, it can be determined that commercial fisheries are the leading cause when it comes to marine mammal bycatching and their mortality. But because they are highly regulated, the majority of the marine mammals that they do bycatch tend to stay below their PBR value. On top of that, this study also brought to light that recreational and artisanal fisheries don't have a lot of studies done on them or the effect that their bycatching can have on the population or individual species of marine mammals. So more studies will have to be done on recreational and artisanal fishery bycatching on marine mammals to know more information about what the true extent of their effect is. On top of that is that if the bycatching of marine mammals continues on without being monitored, it could lead to the extinction of many apex marine mammals such as killer whales. And if this happens, this could also affect the coastal distribution of small marine mammals. And on top of that, it could also cause detrimental effects at both the community and ecological level. This concludes the end of my presentation, and thank you.